Hello everyone, and today I'm going to be talking about Big Brother 3. And it's definitely a season that I've always enjoyed, and I enjoyed it even more after this rewatch, since I'm paying attention specifically to the gameplay and just being entertained. You could definitely tell that the production value definitely increased from BB2 to BB3, and this cast, like the last cast, was very moralistic in how they wanted the game to be played and how they viewed it, and that's definitely due to how reality TV overall was in the early 2000s. And in my opinion, this was the last cast that really captured the meaning of all walks of life, as many of the casts after this won't follow this, and you would see that many of the house guests fit the same archetype. This season is definitely not one of the more dramatic casts, but you don't need a whole lot of drama to have a good season, as you just mainly need a likable, solid cast, and this cast is definitely one of the best in that regard, and they're one of the funniest casts ever. So week one was a relatively okay week. Nothing too much happening, and a lot of the alliances aren't very defined. And the one defined alliance here doesn't really have much importance. So, Amy talks about not caring to piss people off, Jason mentions playing for God, Danielle talks about being a sassy family woman, Marcellus mentions being stylish, Tanya essentially talks about being a tough mom, Roddy talks about being ready to play the gang, and Jerry wants to teach the kids a lesson. Roddy talks about the overzealous / religious types and they pan to Jason, so it seems like the producers wanted them to clash, which never really happens throughout the season. Josh talks about being the Joker and us showing his awkward relationship with women for some reason. Lori talks about being a small-time girl, or a small-town girl, waiting for big things. Kiara talks about being a kick-ass girl next door, which is an oxymoron in my opinion, and Eric and Lisa essentially talk about their sex appeal. Josh and Marcellus immediately do not like one another once they enter the house, as Marcellus mentions that Josh will crack under pressure, which he was correct about. Danielle notices that Lisa is going to be underestimated in so many words, and a few of them feel awkwardly about Tanya, Amy, and Jerry annoying people. And it seems like Kiara is attracted to Eric, which is interesting. And Tanya takes a liking to Kiara. Amy continues to annoy people during the Have-Not competition, and the pairs in this are Amy and Jerry, Jason and Lori, Marcellus and Danielle, Kiara and Eric, Roddy and Tanya, and Lisa and Josh. And you can see how some of these pairings would be important in some of the alliances and relationships that were formed, kind of like in BB Can 11, which I covered recently. Josh ends up forming the majority alliance with Lisa, Kiara, Eric, Roddy, and Amy initially, but we would eventually find out that she was replaced in the alliance. And Jerry's included in this as well, as they were all the first ones to drop out of their comp. And Josh is pushing for Marcellus to go because he is so negative and the other guys are pushing it, even though Marcellus went to bed early, which is definitely not a good strategy to have in BB. Marcellus knows that Josh is trying to fish information out of him when they talk, but he is not falling for it. Many people mentioned that it wasn't a good idea for Lori and Jason to win the 30,000 as they would have gotten due to being the last ones in the first comp. Like in BB2, the first HOH competition is based on first impressions and shows who is doing well and who's doing poorly with their house guests at this point in time. It shows that Amy, Marcellus, and Jerry aren't doing well, and Jason, Lori, who was second in the competition, just like Cheryl was last season, and Danielle aren't doing well, as well as Lisa, who ends up winning the first head of household. Josh tells Lisa that Roddy and Jason did not vote for her to win HOH, and Lori tells Roddy that she has never had a one-on-one conversation with Lisa, where she and Roddy discuss that Josh, Marcellus, and Amy might be in danger. Eric starts getting close to Lisa, and people are starting to kiss her ass. Josh is salty that Lori kicked him out of the HOH comp, and people start speculating about Marcellus being gay, where he knows people knows, but no one has directly asked him, but he knows that it is going to come. Danielle and Tanya start to bond about being mothers, though we know this will change, at least with Danielle's opinion on Tanya, and Jason mentions that he is bonding with the mothers of the house, and he would later mention that it was a part of his strategy to get with a mother. Marcellus is struggling with the social aspect of the game, where he wants to talk about the styling choices and the humidity, and he wants Lori and Tanya gone, where he goes in on Tanya, especially, which is definitely a running theme. Josh mentions that Marcellus has a strong estrogen level in him, which is very yikes, and he mentions that he volunteered himself against Marcellus on the block, but now he is against that idea and doesn't trust Lisa much at all, which is a recurring theme as well. This ends up being true, where Lisa and some of the other women house guests rant about Josh. We have a small segment about Jason being a virgin, and it would never make the air nowadays if this were to happen in a more recent cast or a recent season. Overall, Kiara figures it out, and he thinks it will make him more of an outsider. The six is now Lisa, Roddy, Josh, Kiara, Eric, and Jerry, and they kind of kick Amy out of the alliance, but they will still use her. Lisa feels unsure about the alliance, which is a good read on her part, and doesn't really trust them, but will use it for now. Josh tries to mansplain to Lisa about how to tell Lori about the nomination, and she tells him that she can play the game for herself. Josh ends up telling Lori that she's going to be nominated as a pawn, and he swears on everything that she is safe, though Lori knows that he is manipulative. Lisa nominates Marcellus and Lori for eviction. Both of them are sad about the nominations, though Marcellus mentions that he feels sad for her, despite mentioning that he wants her gone in the last episode, and her, meaning Lori. But Marcellus feels like he was stabbed in the back by Lisa, since he was nice to her before she won HOH and they actually connected. Lisa thinks that Danielle came into her room to, quote-unquote, cheer her up in order to rub it in her face more, and Lori is told that she is the pawn. Amy admits that while she is close with Marcellus, she's planning to vote him out, and Josh aligns with Jason because he thinks that Jason wants to be here. Jason plans to be loyal, but if Josh is unloyal, he has no problems turning on him, which is definitely a sign of what Jason is capable of doing in the game. Lisa lusts after Eric and mentions that she wanted him since the beginning, and we see Jason and Danielle aligning as they are playing cards together. He tells her that he's been approached in an alliance by Josh, and this worries Danielle, since she has yet to be approached by an alliance by anyone, and knows that not only is she on the outs, but that Josh is running Lisa's HOH, even mentioning some of his allies. We are introduced to Amy's obsession with cheese, and it's pretty funny. Kiara and Marcellus jokingly talk about Marcellus being gay, and we get the start of Roddy and Kiara's romance, and we're definitely in a journey with this one. The main group talks about how they think Lori is working everyone, and Eric mentions that he trusts her over Danielle, which Jerry tells Danielle, and she knows it's because she doesn't ogle over him, and we see Jerry getting sick of Josh while reporting info to people. Marcellus slowly starts to open up to people more, and knows that he has to get over that social hurdle, where he starts making people laugh by shading Tanya. What's interesting is that Danielle mentions to Marcellus that it sucks that there aren't immunity challenges, since she was a Survivor fan before watching or becoming a part of BB, but they're right after introduced to the silver power of veto. Jerry ends up winning the veto, though a lot of people took themselves out of the comp, and most of the house is worried, since they don't trust Jerry, and most of them didn't want to win it because they didn't want to be put in a position where they have to use it or not. People are talking about what Jerry will do, and everyone wants the nominations to stay the same, and we will start to see the flaws with the veto during this era of the show. Jerry talks to Marcellus that he's considering to use the veto, and he mentions that it was a smokescreen, that people mentioned that his negativity was not about racism or homophobia. Lori and Josh talk about some prejudgments about Marcellus, and this narrative will continue for a while. We get a really poor scene of Josh slapping people's butts, and it aged even worse now than it already did back in 2002, and he admits that he doesn't care that the women are uncomfortable. Yikes. We see many different sides of Danielle, where it just shows how good her social game is, and how she uses it, especially with her making people laugh, and this leads into her iconic diary rooms, which we'll get from this point onwards. Marcellus talks about how he was engaged to a woman, and how he was in love with her, where it's an interesting story, and the woman really starts warming up to him, as he is really opening up. There was the infamous hand-washing incident where Jerry used the washroom and didn't wash his hands while he continued cooking, so Danielle and Kiara mentions it to the others in the living room, which is a problem because he cooks a lot. It ends up with Lori and Danielle arguing about it, since she should have pulled Jerry into the room, and they eventually do that and tell him that he needs to wash his hands. Danielle realizes that she let Lori get to her, and she shouldn't have done that, but Lori will get herself voted out if she continues digging a hole for herself. Amy is struggling to fit in, since she has an air of superiority about certain things, and when she's happy, she's not worried about trying to make others happy, and this was mainly due to Kiara, Lisa, and I think Tanya being in the shower and trying to get Amy to join in as a fun activity. Jerry talks about how he has black family members and how he has gay friends, which is just very uncomfortable to watch. And of course, Marcellus does not want to be vetoed because he is black and gay. Jerry talks to Danielle about it, and it makes her uncomfortable, but she tells Kiara and Lisa that Jerry is thinking about using it due to the reasons he stated, and she's letting people think that she's on their side. Jerry vetoes Marcellus and mentions all the stuff in his speech, and Lisa nominates Amy in his place. Lori and Amy feel pretty safe, but clearly one of them isn't safe, and Josh feels away since he feels like Jerry called him homophobic and racist, where many people are annoyed that the veto was used, claiming that Jerry is a marked man next week. Jerry feels like a hero because of what he's done, and admits that he let his prejudices be pushed by the others, and the six talk about an quote-unquote agreement instead of an alliance, where Roddy replaced Amy in it, and Tanya now took Jerry's spot in the agreement, but it's divided based on gender lines. Danielle and Jason are sitting back and letting everyone fight it out, and to be innocent as a dove and sly as a snake. Lori gets emotional about the alliance stuff, and she sees that Amy is trying to fit in with the house, where the alliance stuff disgusts Lori. Amy still feels safe, and Lori does not feel safe anymore, as things are changing, and people mention that she is unpredictable and cuckoo. Most of the episode is spent on seeing the updates from the BB2 cast and the families of the three nominees, but Lori ends up being evicted on a 5-4 vote, and from what I could grasp, a few people individually gave Lori the word that they wouldn't vote her out, and that's why it was so close. I definitely think Lori is one of, if not the most memorable first boot in Big Brother USA, just because of her bold personality and her welcoming spirit, and I do definitely think she would have been more entertaining had she stayed long, but apparently her mother told her that she would have been the first boot, or she's going to be the first boot, and that came to be. I don't have much thought about her as a game player, but she was definitely a good character, and she is a prime example of how a first boot can be likable if you just develop them a bit more and give them attention. For a week that has the underdog that was completely on the outs in the last week winning power and taking control, this week is actually a pretty boring week. There are definitely a few things happening here that makes it above a complete bore, but it's definitely not one of the stronger weeks of the season. People are shocked that the vote was so close, though Kiara predicts most of the votes, and Marcellus ends up winning the HOH. He makes it clear that he does not want people to ask him about nominations, and if they ask him, he might nominate them, which isn't ideal gameplay-wise. Josh feels very nervous with Marcellus being HOH. Everyone talks about how Jerry is trying to relate to every group he can, meaning relating to black people, Jewish people, virgins, homosexual people, so on and so forth. And some mention that it is a generation gap, and people like Lisa mention that the house is blatantly ignoring him. They mention that he won't be around much longer, which is interesting to see how statements like this age. The women have a bathing suit competition, and they were not allowed to use any material, which causes them to use peanut butter instead. It is interesting that this happened a few months before what Jenna and Heidi did in Survivor the Amazon. We are subjected to more Kiara and Roddy's romance content. Josh ends up cheating in the have-not competition, and it digs his grave even more, as Marcellus complains about hating him even more. Josh ends up campaigning for his life and calls Jerry prejudiced, anti-Semitic, and racist, hoping that Jerry is nominated against him and telling Marcellus that he will never nominate him. We see how close Marcellus and Amy have gotten, and it's presented as cute, funny content, as they are both snooty gossip queens who have an air of superiority, with them mentioning that they can't imagine the house without the other. Josh calls Danielle out for aligning with the scum of Jerry, and she tells him that he doesn't know anything and that he does not want to go there with her. She tells him that he made threats and held influence over the people with their HOH, and it all goes back to the Six, which he denies, though she does not believe him at all. Marcellus knows that Roddy is one to watch as the threat of the house, and Danielle reports her conversation with Josh to Marcellus, where she mentions that they might have to sacrifice Jerry because him being aligned with them isn't a good look. Marcellus sees Danielle will do anything for the money, so he doesn't trust her, and he mentions that someone from the clique, meaning Josh, Eric, Kiara, Lisa, and Tanya, need to go. It's interesting that he doesn't group Roddy in this for some reason, despite his earlier sentiments. Marcellus nominates Josh and Tanya for eviction and makes it clear that Tanya is the pawn. Tanya feels like she is pretty safe, and Marcellus realizes that he is starting to realize that he is feeling like he will do more cutthroat things in the future. He says Tanya has the heart of a hoe, ouch, so she wants to be there, and he does not like her or what she represents, so he'll be fine if she went home instead of Josh. Though we knew that he disliked her based on prior comments, and it's clear that his nominations were solely personal and not very strategic. Roddy wants to keep Josh in the house, but knows that half of his alliance wants to keep Tanya in the house. Everyone talks about how Josh is becoming more and more paranoid, and he mentions that as a Jewish person, he went through more things that Danielle and Marcellus get as black people, and it's nothing compared to what he goes through. No comment. It is clear that a lot of people do not want to win the veto yet again, and we will start to see the flaws of the veto at this point in BBUSA's history. Danielle ends up winning the veto because she wants the power. Marcellus knows that Danielle is going to push her own agenda and thinking that he can't see it, especially after she pushes for him to nominate Jerry if she vetoes Josh, since she does not see Jerry as a solid ally, and while he doesn't trust Jerry, it's a bad look to take him out after what happened. We learn about the supposed triangle between Kiara, Roddy, and Amy, where Amy and Roddy sometimes do flirt, and she's annoyed that Kiara always interrupts them, and Roddy kisses Amy while Kiara is hanging out with Jason. Amy and Kiara talk trash about one another, and Marcellus tries to get them to make amends, but it's all fake. Amy tells Josh that she wants him to stay, but she wants to know who he would nominate if he wins HOH next week, and he just mentions that he's trying to make it through the week, but he wants to know who she's talking about, and he knows that she wants him to throw Kiara under the bus, who Amy calls white trash. Danielle talks to a few people about who they would vote out if it's between Josh and Jerry, but it doesn't matter since Danielle doesn't use the veto. Tanya feels sure that she has the votes, so she does not need to campaign for any more votes, since she has the 3 and hopes people have sense to make the obvious choice. We see Josh campaigning, and he claims that the tears aren't real, though he admitted in the last episode that they were. There's a clear guys versus girls divide in the alliance, where Roddy and to a lesser extent Eric are campaigning for Josh to stay, but people told Roddy that Josh meant to not let Roddy's quote-unquote niceness fool them and that he came in with an agenda. Josh blames Kiara on this, and it's supposed to cause doubt in the vote, especially since Lisa and Kiara want Tanya to stay. We do see Tanya get into a fight with Marcellus and Amy because Tanya said she needs to go to Alcoholics Anonymous after this, and this will be an ongoing thing with Amy throughout the entire season, and she assumed Amy was talking about her outside, but she wasn't, and Marcellus defends her, causing the two of them to go at it. Tanya is evicted in a 5-3 vote. There really isn't much to say about Tanya as a game player, and even as a personality, she's kind of forgettable, since we've seen MILF archetypes beforehand, and we'll see a few more afterwards. I didn't really like the commentary about how people insinuated that she was a bad mother and was promiscuous, unless there's some additional context from the feeds that I was missing. But in general, there really isn't a whole lot to say about Tanya. I don't remember Cheryl getting these comments last year, so it has to be something else. Week 3 is definitely kind of lukewarm, and I honestly forgot how slow the beginning of the season is, especially compared to BB2, but you start to see the formation of what would become the great dynamics of the future weeks in this week. So things are starting to build up slowly and surely. So Josh is mad that Lisa voted to evict him, since it just confirms that he could not trust her, and a few people mentioned that Tanya's fight with Amy and Marcellus switched up their votes, and Danielle also mentioned that as a mother, she does not respect her, which is just ouch. Roddy ends up winning the HOH, and Danielle is worried about Roddy winning the season over everyone else. Amy is worried about Kiara controlling his HOH, and Marcellus is worried because Tanya was Kiara's BFF, and she might get Roddy to target him. Roddy makes a deal with Jerry that if he nominates him, Jerry won't nominate him when he gets an HOH, which is a very good move in hindsight, and Roddy mentions in the diary room that he wants deals. He and Eric talk about how Josh is annoyingly paranoid. We get some funny segments about Jerry working out in the pool and Roddy being a walking encyclopedia and a ranch fest. And we get more banter about the raunchy Kiara and her dynamic with the holy Jason. We get more focus on Lisa and Eric's romance and how neither one of them were expecting it to happen, especially since Eric is seeing someone back home, and we get even more focus on Eric sleep talking. Josh rants about the girls in their alliance doing whatever they want, and it's clear Roddy gives 0 Fs about this conversation, especially when Josh pitches for Marcellus and Lisa to go up and to send Lisa home. Josh feels like he can control Roddy, so he tries to convince Roddy to not nominate Amy, but it pisses him off, and it pisses him off that he's trying to get him to target Lisa as well. Roddy nominates Amy and Marcellus for eviction. Marcellus is very worried since Roddy told him that he's the decoy, but the only 2 people who have left so far have been the decoys, so it's clear why Marcellus is rightfully worried. Roddy tries to do damage control with the nominees, and they are not feeling it whatsoever. They blame Kiara for the nominations, and Eric kind of does as well, which is very interesting, since he is Roddy's #1 ally. And Roddy reassures Marcellus that he will put it on his life that it will be a unanimous vote against Amy, and Marcellus thinks that there has to be some bigger plan, since Amy isn't plotting and scheming in the house. There's even more paranoia since Marcellus is sleeping in the same place as the 2 evictees slept, and his memory picture is with them as well. Danielle talks about her strategy of only promising one person that she will never turn on them, and that is Jason, since they are both involved in their faith. They strategize while playing cards in the washroom, and they mention how they can play both sides of the house, especially since they barely talk in the day. Roddy believes that Jason will never do anything untrustworthy, right as Danielle and Jason are plotting his demise, so he doesn't steamroll in 6 weeks. Or was it 3 weeks? We start to see the cracks in Amy and Marcellus' friendship, which would unfortunately cause them to fall out after this season. Kiara really starts to fall for Roddy, and Marcellus games with Danielle, where they mention that they have to work with Jerry, Josh, and Jason to target the couples next week, since there will be 9 people next week, and if they work with those 3, it'll be 5 against 4. The guys versus girls dynamic is delved into, where Eric pretty much mentions that they are emotional, based on their lack of information and how the guys will steamroll, while Kiara, Lisa, and Danielle agree to work together since the girls are becoming extinct. And we will see how this ages in a bit over a week. And Josh goes on some sexist rant about how idiotic they are, because they didn't vote how they're supposed to vote, in his opinion, and he's really just a pain in the ass to watch at this point. Amy goes on about how she was too much premature, how her family raised her to be more superior than everyone else, and she was an ugly duckling, and didn't understand why people didn't like her when she was younger. And she goes through a lot of self-realizations throughout the season, which is very cool to watch. Eric wins the veto, and of course doesn't use it. Gameplay-wise, there really isn't anything happening, but we do see Amy mentioning that she doesn't want to go out a unanimous vote, and she tries to make light of it while making snarky comments about it as well, which annoys Marcellus. This causes for an argument between Marcellus and Amy to argue, since she's telling people that he doesn't want her to have one vote, where he thinks that it could cause the tides to turn against him to send him home. And it's all a huge emotional misunderstanding, but you get another clue as to why they don't stay friends after the season. Apparently after this, they held a nice roast for Amy, and they gave her compliments and about how much they like her and what she can improve on, though we see this in a later episode. Eric makes some snide remark to Julie about how he's finally on the show, so it shows that even way back then, the house guests knew who would be on the show or not. We get a segment about how Jerry avoided being nominated and how he has seemingly avoided being the target, though many people still complained about how he is untrustworthy, is ostracized, and some people are actively still targeting him, mainly Lisa, Eric, and Kiara. Josh and Jerry realize that they need to work together since the couples are the bigger problem. Amy is evicted in a unanimous 7-0 vote. There really is no one like Amy in Big Brother USA history, and she was really just a fun person to watch during this time. Though I definitely think she's an awful player, but she brings a lot of comedy and a lot of the heart of the season, and we'll definitely see more of that when she comes back. The season really starts to pick up here and in a much more positive direction, something that we rarely see happen in Big Brother US and Canada seasons, where all the underdogs and the people on the outs get together with the common goal of taking out the people in the majority, and it's nice that this happened under natural gameplay circumstances and not due to contrived twists, so it really makes this week stand out to me. Apparently, Amy asked everyone to give her a vote, which is why Josh didn't give her one, and despite not getting a vote, Marcellus still doesn't trust anyone. Jerry ends up winning HOH, and Eric, who was second in the competition, is worried, since he and his people would have been safe had anyone else won, which isn't that accurate, actually. People are seeing how close Jerry and Josh are, which is weird since Josh called Jerry a Nazi, and Marcellus hopes that himself, Jason, and Danielle are not nominated, and Jerry and Josh are hoping that they can trust one another. For some reason, Jason and Danielle think that Jerry is out to get him, which would be an insightful tip as to what will eventually happen with Jerry. And Kiara and Danielle have a conversation about how there's only 3 women in the house, and they promise to look out for one another. For some reason, Kiara tells Roddy this, which is stupid, which just causes him to mention that he would be okay if Kiara goes home. Jerry tells Roddy that he is safe due to Roddy protecting him last week, and we see Eric tell Josh that he would be fine if Lisa goes this week, since it's clear that one of the 5 is going home. We get a lot of Lisa and Eric content, and then we see Roddy and Kiara content, where she gets annoyed that he doesn't know her last name, and he's annoyed that she keeps on calling him Hardy, though they both mention that they know nothing about him, showing that they are recruits who came in blind, but as we've seen on live feeds, people talk about past seasons to people who didn't even watch past seasons, so it's clear how the Roddy and Hardy comparisons would come up. Danielle tells Kiara that she told him not to do the obvious, which means to not target and evict a woman. Marcellus questions to Jerry as to why he isn't targeting Roddy, and that the woman will self-destruct, so Roddy or Eric needs to go this week. Jerry nominates Lisa and Eric for eviction. The quote-unquote cool kid crew rant about Jerry, since they claim that Jerry is playing just as dirty despite the speech he made against him, and they mention that he won't be around for much longer, since he's gone next week, which they said, 3 weeks ago, and he's still here, so clearly that isn't happening. Lisa mentions that she feels safe, and she, as well as some of the women, will see some of the men dwindle, which is true, and Eric thinks that he is safe, since he has the guy's vote, and in a tie, Jerry would evict Lisa. Lisa and some of the others talk about how they want someone good-natured to win, which Danielle is present for the conversation, and that Jerry and Josh will be gone in the next 2 weeks. Lisa uses the quote-unquote bad people need to go argument, and is shocked that he's keeping someone who treated him so badly to be safe. She admits that people need to make a fake deal interesting, since she's pushing the good person narrative with this, so he can put up Josh as the replacement nominee. We get a scene of Danielle's teeth grinding in her sleep, and she mentions that she wants the veto to stay the same so she can boot Eric, and Kiara is worried that she will be the replacement nominee if someone is vetoed off, where she ends up winning the veto. She and Roddy discuss about maybe speaking to Jerry to veto Lisa and hoping that Josh will go up, but he responds that Roddy will probably go up, no matter what Jerry states, and they also mention that Lisa would be going over Eric here, so that's clearly something that was being pushed. Lisa and Eric think that Josh is manipulating Jerry, though it's really Danielle, Marcellus, and Jason, and Eric throws Josh under the bus to Jerry. Josh overhears the conversation and tells Danielle about it, where they agree that Kiara cannot use the veto. There is a segment about how everyone thinks Jason is heaven sent and not strategizing at all, but we then switch to see him plotting the hell out of the house and scheming, which would shock several people. We start to see Kiara's phoniness, where she lets Roddy convince her that Eric needs to stay over Lisa because Lisa is more likely to put him up than Eric, and then her strongest ally will be voted out. And he's clearly doing this from the selfish vantage point of him, and not talking about her. She mentions how Lisa annoys her and whines a lot, despite being in her corner, so she is not cool like one of her, or her friends in general, in her real life. Kiara does not end up using the veto. Neither Eric or Lisa are campaigning to stay, and people are campaigning for either one of them. Lisa is very blind, as she thinks that she has the girls in that house on her side, but Kiara wants Lisa to go home, and she tells Jason that she is closer to him than either of the women, and she tells him that she's going to evict Lisa. Jason tells Marcellus this, who tells Danielle this, which pisses off the both of them. Josh tells Kiara that Eric and Lisa were talking about her, though he doesn't know this to be the actual case in actuality, and she uses this as an excuse to Danielle, and the latter mentions that you have to question their source with stuff like this. Danielle and Marcellus want Eric to go, since they need to weaken Roddy. The vote is revealed to be a 3-3 tie, and Jerry has to break the vote, where he votes to evict Eric. In the grand scheme of things, Eric is definitely one of the more forgettable people of the season, though I did like the segment about him sleep talking, but in general, he wasn't the most entertaining. As a player, I honestly don't think he's a bad one, and I think he had pretty standard gameplay, but he was not able to adapt, and that is what eventually bit him in the end, especially with the quote-unquote cool kid narrative. But in general, Eric was just fine enough, I guess. And this was definitely the catalyst for the rest of the season. Week 5 definitely continues the brilliant stretch that we will get that started in the last week. As the Majority Alliance officially turned on one another, the coup d'etat that happened based on natural gameplay officially happened, and this is arguably the most dramatic week of the season, where there's a lot of drama. And this season is not one that has a lot of drama, compared to Big Brother 2 especially, so I think it's a joy. Everyone is emotional over Eric's eviction for their own reasons, and Kiara wins the next HOH. Jerry thinks that he will go up, while Josh thinks that he won't be nominated, though Kiara intends on making a deal with Jerry. Josh tells Roddy that he saw Jason and Marcellus shaking hands about the Eric vote, and Roddy tells Marcellus he doesn't care that Josh didn't want this. And this is the continual trend of Roddy throwing Josh under the bus, though he gets in his feelings when Josh does the same thing back to him. Marcellus denies this, but mentions that Jason can vote however he wants to. Roddy, Josh, and Kiara are mad that Jason voted to keep Lisa over Eric, and Jason mentions that he saw Eric sell Josh out the moment he was in danger, which caused Jason to be wary, and he didn't want to be pushed around. He also lies about the deal with Marcellus when he's asked about it. Danielle thanks Kiara for voting to keep Lisa, knowing that she didn't, and Danielle now has Kiara's number, which will be handled in due time. In due time. I love the way Danielle says it. Danielle tells Lisa that it was herself, Jason, and Marcellus who voted to keep her, and Danielle swears on her kids, which shocks Lisa since she assumed Kiara would vote to keep her, as they both talk about Kiara afterwards. Roddy is struggling to be interested in the shallow conversations of the other house guests, while the others feel like he talks about things that are not important to the other house guests, so that is a social struggle he is having. We hear Kiara's sexual talk and cursing like a sailor, but she says that she does it because she wants to be different, knowing that it isn't very girly. It's interesting to see someone like Kiara in the 2002 context, where she's just very open and free about her sexuality and likes pushing gender norms, and I don't think this will be something that would be heavily covered on Modern Big Brother, or at least without it seeming very performative on the editor's point of view, if that makes sense to anyone. The house guests are told that one of the first 4 evicted house guests are going to compete to come back next week, and of course, some people have their reasons for why they want some people to come back. Kiara asks Lisa if she told Eric that she cannot trust Kiara and would target her, which Lisa denies because it didn't happen. Kiara is mad because she realizes that Josh gypped her and makes a deal with Jerry, who is more than fine with Josh being targeted. Kiara mentions to Roddy that she's thinking of putting him up since he's the only one who has to deal with Josh, and he is worried since 3 of the 4 people who were evicted were decoys. Kiara nominates Josh and Roddy for eviction. Josh decides to pack it up immediately after the nomination ceremony, and Lisa asks Josh what she supposedly said about Kiara, and Josh mentions that Roddy got her to vote Lisa out, and Kiara is covering her ass. Lisa and Danielle start plotting on how to get Roddy out and to let Kiara think that she still has power. Danielle also mentions that Lisa is learning a lot from her about keeping her mouth shut and keeping her eyes open, which will eventually backfire. Roddy and Josh start arguing because Roddy already covered himself on votes because he was still panicked about last week, and Josh thinks that it's bullcrap since he was the one who got Kiara to vote out Lisa, and Roddy told him this himself, which Roddy ends up denying. Lisa enters the conversation and tells Josh that he's dropping his balls to start mess, and Kiara follows her, who is also in the conversation, since she thinks Lisa is hearing about her vote for the first time. Kiara tells Lisa that she voted that way because she knew Jason was going to vote to Eric out, and knew that it would be a tie vote, which she and Danielle know is bullshit, and they mention that with Roddy and Kiara campaigning against her, she might nominate them if she wins HOH, and Danielle wants to break her word against Kiara to vote Roddy out. Josh tries to walk out of the house, but he is convinced not to. The house talks about avoiding Jerry because of his disgusting hygienic habits with coughing over food, putting his sweaty clothes in with the clean, dry clothes, and so much more, which just makes me want to throw up. Danielle asks Marcellus if it would be crazy to keep Josh around, and he says it's destructive, but they go back and forth gaming about it. Jason told her that he can't do it, or at least not this week. Marcellus is not sure if they can get Lisa to vote with them, so they pitch it to Jerry, since he's worried about being a dead man if Eric comes back in the house. Lisa ends up winning the veto, and Danielle is hoping that Lisa reconsiders all of her options with the veto. Lisa is talking about the new Lisa, who's darker and more cutthroat, and she makes up with Kiara, telling Kiara to pretty much not explain herself because things will not line up even more and will just frustrate Lisa even more. Lisa, Marcellus, and Danielle talk about how they don't trust Kiara, who is a liar, and she's not strong without Roddy, who is her backbone, so they need to get rid of him now. The house talks about the positives and negatives of Josh, who is a good person deep down, but has become very sad and emotional this week. Josh asks Lisa to use the veto on Roddy, but she clearly has no intention of doing so, as she blatantly laughs right after he leaves the conversation. Josh blasts Kiara in his veto speech about him being so-called untrustworthy, though she lied on him twice and turned on Lisa, and Lisa does not use the veto. Lisa and Danielle are seemingly supporting Kiara, but they both agree with Josh, and they are playing her. Josh decides to campaign in the game, and Jerry mentions to him that there are discussions to keep him in the house. Josh goes to the others, and Danielle speaks to Lisa, who is seemingly for it. Josh and Jerry have another conversation, where the latter tells him that everyone that isn't in the showmance is essentially discussing it, which includes Marcellus. Jerry gives Marcellus a heads up that he will be approached by Josh. Marcellus tells Roddy that Josh asked for his vote, which caused for Roddy and Josh to go at it, since he went on the block so he wouldn't have to vote against Josh, who mentions that people came to him about the idea. Roddy asked for people to be honest about it, and of course everyone's going to deny it in front of Roddy, though Jerry mentions to Josh that Josh asked him and said that there were slight discussions. Marcellus goes at Josh about him being the reason why he's on the block, and that 11 of the other people aren't going to want to speak to him ever again, where a few people clap in agreement, and it's kind of just sad to watch. We also see another argument that starts up, since Josh and Marcellus are talking about the first week, and Josh states that even Amy would have voted him out, which he did state if we watched that first week. This causes for Marcellus to cry in his room, and Kiara tries to cheer him up, but ends up snapping at Josh over what he told Marcellus, since there was no guarantee that he would have left, though Josh isn't lying at all. Josh is evicted in a unanimous 5-0 vote, and Amy is voted back into the house by Jerry, Lisa, Danielle, Jason, and Marcellus, so in a 5-2 vote. So, I most definitely do not like Josh. I don't like a lot of his comments, I don't like a lot of his actions. I found it to be very poorly aged in 2002, and it's aged even more poorly 21 years later. It's interesting because he took Rob Cesternino's spot on the season, where they put him on Survivor the Amazon a few months later, and it would have been interesting to see how Rob would have done on the season. At the end, you do somewhat start to feel bad for Josh, as everyone kind of just scapegoats him for everything, but it was all based on the actions that he did previously, and clearly he's not a good player whatsoever. He actually had the votes to stay, but actively made things, or did things, to the point where he lost the votes and it became a unanimous vote. Week 6 is simply one of those karmic weeks in Big Brother that we get every once in a while, but once we get it, it's just so satisfying. And especially after the past 2 weeks, which were very great, this week continuing that momentum just really spiced up the season for me, especially with them handling the returnee twist for the first time ever. Amy is essentially given the HOH since the house, with the exception of Roddy and Kiara, came up with a plan for her to get HOH so she can do their dirty work. Kiara is bitching and complaining about Amy coming back, and Lisa breaks down about her vote, since Amy told her that Eric said hi before she went in. Lisa couldn't imagine herself voting him back in, and him wanting to work with Roddy and Kiara again, where it was just too much for her and she couldn't see herself working with the two of them ever again. Amy was fine with nominating anyone but Marcellus for the first 12 hours, and Kiara immediately kisses up to Amy, trying to make it seem like she was fine with Amy coming back, which Lisa and Danielle talk about, and the latter mentions that Roddy nominated Amy and Marcellus together so they can use that point. Marcellus and Roddy talk about the cloud that hangs over the latter, especially since he was influential over Josh's choices and Kiara's actions, since a bit before she became HOH, and Roddy mentions that there's a separation between the deals you make and the people you spend time with. He mentions that if the world thought like him, Marcellus would have never felt prejudice due to his race or sexuality. Danielle is worried about Marcellus and Roddy talking, as Marcellus isn't targeting him, which he admits, and this is the start of Danielle calling Roddy the devil, and she tells Marcellus to tell Amy that he nominated the both of them. People are starting to notice that Jerry has not been nominated because he's just hanging out, weaseling himself around people, and makes sure that he is involved. Marcellus tells Amy that Kiara became a monster after she left, since Kiara turned on Lisa, tried bullying Jason and Marcellus into voting out Lisa and voting to keep Eric and her HOH in general, and he talks about Roddy's double dealing. Lisa and Danielle think that Marcellus and Jerry have a deal since 3 days ago. Marcellus mentions that he would nominate Roddy and Jerry, and they realize that they cannot boot Roddy without Marcellus. Sorry, they think that Marcellus and Roddy have a deal, not Marcellus and Jerry. Danielle tries to get Amy to target Roddy, but she isn't biting, as Amy and Marcellus don't want to send him home, and she wants to get her revenge on Kiara. Amy tells Roddy everything, and how most of the house planned to nominate him and Kiara before she even came back, where she was given the HOH for this reason. Roddy knows that Danielle is the main person behind it. Roddy and Marcellus go into the hot tub, and he really starts the flirting and the seduction, where Roddy tries to make a final two deal with Marcellus, which he agrees with. Danielle and Amy have a conversation where she tells her that she's putting up Kiara and Jason, and Danielle mentions that if Kiara gets free, meaning if she gets vetoed, then Amy would have to nominate someone else. Amy goes on a rant how she wants to send her out, and how it offends her that Kiara lasted longer than she did. But she will nominate Roddy if Danielle promises to vote Kiara out. Amy nominates Kiara and Roddy for eviction. Kiara feels like she is robbed since she cannot plan anything during her HOH due to someone coming back, and she apparently ranted about this a lot during the week on live eviction, or on live feeds, and after her eviction, where she claims that the house came up with an Operation Revolving Door plan, which we would hear about the next week, where whoever returns would be evicted immediately afterward, and she claimed that the producers apparently told Amy that she needed to win HOH for this reason. Danielle does not give Kiara much, who is fishing for information, but she tells her that she has her, and she later has a conversation with Jason about targeting Roddy, and he agrees to it this time, and they mention that Jerry has a deal, in addition to Marcellus being the only one who would save Roddy with the veto. We see Kiara ranting, since she cannot compete in the HOH competition. It feels like it wasn't fair, though the others pointed out that she knew about the rules with the outgoing HOH not competing in the following HOH. And the others, like Danielle and Lisa, mentioned this a few times, and how she wouldn't be complaining if Eric came in the house instead of Amy, and she should have discussed with Roddy that he needed to win HOH since he bailed immediately on the competition. Jerry ends up winning the veto, and people are worried since he's the only one to have used the veto so far this season. Marcellus is getting annoyed with Danielle since she's so pushy with her agenda, which she mentioned very early on in the season, and she makes the money seem so life or death for her, and she makes the game/money seem so make or break. And Roddy agrees with this, where he tells Kiara and Lisa that this isn't a Make-A-Wish Foundation, and she sounds ridiculous saying this, since she's on TV saying this, which many people don't have the privilege of being on TV and being able to afford being on TV for 3 months. Amy and Marcellus even talk about it, where they mention it to Lisa that Danielle is obsessed about getting Roddy out. Apparently, people mentioned in the past that they wanted Danielle to win due to her situation. Danielle and Amy have a conversation where Danielle mentions that she feels stupid if they had the chance to get Roddy out, and he ends up getting her out at the end. But Amy tells her that she'll campaign against herself to save Danielle if it comes down to it, and Danielle lets it go because she feels bad for Amy. Jerry does not use the veto. Roddy confronts Danielle about how every single person in the house, from Josh to many others over the last several weeks, have told him that she has been blatantly after him, which is why she pulled Jason away from him. And I guess he's referring to the Eric vote, and Danielle outright denies this, but she knows that Marcellus is the only one who has told him the information, since she said that Roddy used her words exactly, so she lost trust in Marcellus. Kiara thinks that Amy is the only reason why they are in this position, though the entire house was planning on this from last week before they even knew Amy was coming back. And she thinks that she has Lisa and Danielle's vote, but Marcellus will vote with Amy's wishes, so she knows that she's going home. Marcellus tells Kiara that she needs to be careful about the people smiling in her face and the people who are lying to her. Kiara reports this to Danielle, and she knows that Marcellus is talking about her. We get some backstory on Kiara and Danielle's friendship, and the latter is not taking this well at all. Marcellus tells Amy that the house wants to vote Roddy out, though he told Danielle that they're not going to tell Amy that they're voting Roddy out, but it was obvious that in the next morning that Amy was told this, since she feels used by the house and doesn't trust anyone. This conversation is happening right as the voting is taking place. Remember that in prior seasons, they voted a day or two before the eviction actually took place, and Danielle rushes to tell Jason to vote the opposite before he casts his vote. We see the breakdown and the outright breakup of Roddy and Kiara's relationship, where we learn that Kiara has taken too many stabs at him and she has embarrassed him, where we get flashbacks to their less than stellar moments. Roddy mentions how she has flirted with Jason, and she talks about her experiences with other guys, where he feels like he could have given it back to her, and we see even more flashbacks of him lecturing and mansplaining her. Kiara does not think that he truly likes her, which she says to his face, and they break up. They give presents to one another, but they end up hating what they got from the other. And, as we would see in the next season, Kiara outright denies that there was ever a showman. So things clearly didn't work out after they were out of the house. Kiara is evicted in a 4-1 vote. Kiara definitely got very annoying during the end of her stay, and she kind of gives off pick-me vibes at several points of the season, but I did like how free she was with her sexuality and not being the so-called feminine woman, and how she lived life doing what she wanted to do, and she was just very liberated. I definitely do think she offered a lot to the season, and she was definitely someone that we wouldn't get very often in Modern Big Brother, or they wouldn't present her in the way that they presented her in 2002 if she was, or someone like her was on in the present day. Week 7 is boring. There's really no way that I could put it in any other words. And I believe it's the most boring week of the entire season, if not potentially tied with another week. And it's sad because we just came off a great stretch of 3 weeks, and we'll have some great weeks after this week, but this one just kind of put a huge damp into the momentum of a great 5 to 6 week streak. So the house guests are worked up over Kiara's eviction, essentially everyone but Amy, especially since Lisa voted against her and Danielle had Roddy by the balls, but Amy's emotions changed her mind to vote out a friend, and Roddy cries over being given a childhood blanket that was hers. Raw moments like these we don't get on the show anymore. Jason ends up winning HOH and everyone feels safe weirdly, though he only cares about keeping Danielle safe. Danielle talks to Jason, and she mentions that the last thing Kiara told her and Lisa is that while Jason is cool, he is weak and cannot be reliable. So Danielle thinks that Roddy probably thinks the same way. So Jason at this point has no problem nominating Roddy. Jason talks about how much he stutters and moves his hair when he is nervous. Danielle makes everyone laugh, and we get a segment about Amy's drinking, where they mention that the old Amy is back. Amy is begging everyone for beer. Jerry had to hide his wine, and Marcellus is trying to contain her, since that's why she was voted out the first time, where he has a tough conversation with her, but she simply put isn't getting it. Jason decides that he wants to make a deal with Roddy to promise that he won't nominate Jason or Danielle if he wins HOH, but she mentions that Roddy mentions that Jason broke his word about the Eric vote. Lisa mentions everything Danielle said, and Marcel said the same thing to Jason as well. Jason speaks to Roddy about him speaking about him during the Eric vote, and Roddy mentions that he has not lied to him, and that there's an agenda that there was this narrative which was told. Roddy bulldozes him in the conversation, mentions their friendship, and he trusts him. Roddy, during this conversation, never states that he didn't say this about Jason. Then ends up with Jason changing his mind and nominating Jerry and Amy for eviction, which annoys Danielle especially. It seems like Jason at this point regrets not nominating Roddy, but mentions that the latter, who is his friend, looked out for him time and time again. This wishy-washiness definitely isn't a good look for Jason and how I would feel about him in different situations. Amy is sure that she is safe, especially since the schools need their teachers, which Jerry is since school is starting soon. And we learn that before Kiara left, she made Roddy and Jason promise to look out for one another. Danielle doesn't see the logic about this, though she understands that Jason did what was best for him, but Marcellus thinks Jason is weak, who won't make the tough choices. That will age very well pertaining him and Jason. We have more discussion of people not trusting Roddy now he has gotten away from eviction many times. We do get the gnome scene, and we deal with Marcellus' funny reaction about his gnome being broken. We get another Marcellus vanity scene where he's in love with himself and always looks at himself in the mirror in the diary room, which everyone calls him out on. Jason ends up winning the veto, being the first person ever to win HOH and POV in the same week, where he could send Roddy home if he wants to. Danielle is not handling things well, since she's the only person that has nothing from home, since she's the only person in the house who hasn't won HOH, which leads to a very emotional America's Choice, where she gets a video from her family and she cries about it. People mention that they don't like how Roddy makes his sentences appear and structures them, which is why he can get away with saying he hasn't lied, and with a few funny scenes of his scary gnome messing with Marcellus' gnome. We have a personal scene about Amy's sadness where she mentions that she will never find love and will always be alone, to the point where she thinks she will be the witch with all the cats when she is older. It's little scenes like this that makes you bond so much with the house guests and feel that connection, but we know that she gets married a few years after this, so it's nice that her fear didn't come true. And some of these personal scenes is one of the reasons why this week isn't a complete waste of time. Jason speaks to Roddy about Danielle, who mentions that he confronted this person about everyone telling him that they don't want him to do well, and they denied it. He mentions that this person gets people to do their dirty work, like Josh, and this person is concerning, so he might have to handle it if he wins HOH. So Jason pretty much gets his confirmation that Roddy is going after Danielle. Despite this, Jason does not end up using the veto. Jerry talks about there being a struggle socially since he is 20 years older than everyone else, and he talks about the perception, where we discuss almost everyone targeting Roddy and Roddy is targeting Danielle. It is something everyone is aware of. People talk about how Danielle is playing everyone equally, and Danielle talks about how she keeps her cards close and hides her alliances, especially with Lisa and Jason, though it seems like she and Jason are planning a tie vote, though that doesn't come true when Jerry is evicted in a unanimous 4-0 vote. Jerry was definitely disturbing, especially with how he handled the situation regarding Marcellus' race and Marcellus' sexuality, and obviously his poor hygiene just really bothers me. But there's a sense of him that was very comedic and easy to laugh at, and he did come off as relatively harmless a majority of the time. And it was his HOH that made the season more interesting. As a player, there really isn't much good to say about Jerry, and this was probably his best ceiling in general. Week 8 is the second most dramatic week of the season, where there was a lot of drama and definitely some backstabbing happening here, as well as some mansplaining and a lot of tension happening as well. And it picked up the momentum that last week stalled, and it was as if we went from week 6 to week 8, since week 7 was a very inconsequential week, and things just continued going in a brilliant direction, as it still peaked and the endgame was starting to form, but things were only getting better and better. So Marcellus ends up winning HOH, and Roddy is annoyed that Amy made the comment of her being the first lady. Marcellus is annoyed that she's hanging out with Roddy since she funnels information to everyone, especially to Roddy. Marcellus also reveals that he was hoping that Roddy could win HOH so he could take out Danielle for him. Lisa and Danielle think that Marcellus might nominate Roddy and Jason, since Roddy would look awful campaigning against Jason, but she can't have that, so she's pushing for Roddy and Amy to be nominated. Danielle, Marcellus, and Lisa talk about how Amy wanted Kiara out so she could be the person that Roddy flirts, ogles, and gives attention to, and we see them flirting with one another, where Amy mentions that he's a lot more relaxed since Kiara left. We get a really brilliant scene of Lisa talking in sign language, especially the alphabet, since she learned it because she has a friend who uses it, and Danielle knows sign language as well, though she only knows the alphabet. We see the two of them talking in sign language, and it's really brilliant to watch, as Lisa signs to Danielle that Amy is talking about Roddy, and this took place on Amy's HOH. The thing is, Roddy is also learning sign language very quickly, so she holds back, and Danielle does not want the devil to learn new tools. Amy ends up losing her ring, not only in the food competition, but then they have to clean up after the comp. Marcellus is at his last wit, and he mentions that she needs to go, which shocks Jason and Danielle. In the bathroom, Danielle signs to Lisa that Marcellus wants Amy gone, and they all see him as sketchy for how quickly he will turn on Amy, and none of them feel safe. Marcellus tries to make a final two deal with her, and he asks her if she's overextended, especially with Jason, but she denies both, and this is the start of where Danielle loses the plot. The two of them mention that they don't want anyone from the Six to make it to the end, so he wants Roddy and Lisa to go back to back. Marcellus nominates Roddy and Amy while giving Amy a really bad speech. Everyone reacts to Marcellus's speech, and they all individually come to the conclusion that he looks awful. Marcellus sees this as a learning opportunity for Amy, but he ultimately states that he wants Roddy gone. Speaking of Roddy, he ends up picking a fight with Danielle and Marcellus about the nominations, and people having a perception of him over the last several weeks. He accuses them of not being honest, and Marcellus mentions that he saw Kiara turn against Lisa due to him, and he enabled Josh's awful behavior until the very last minute. Roddy makes fun of Marcellus for thinking he's the star of the show, and Marcellus mentions that while Roddy mansplaining condescendingly to the two Black House guests being emotional and crazy isn't a good look. Marcellus and Amy make up, but he mentions that she had a bunch of epiphanies in the past that does not last. They mention that they want to be in one another's lives forever, but we know that unfortunately doesn't happen. Roddy conveniently mentions that Amy made a deal with him on week 2 that she would veto him if they were ever on the block together, and for some reason he's ignoring that he sent her home on his HOH the following week after that. Marcellus admits that the main reason that he put Roddy up is because he does not want the narrative of them having a deal, and the house mentions that his social game has improved since Kiara left, since he's hanging out with the others and being fun more, but it's a bit too late. So essentially, Marcellus wants to kill his and Roddy's final 2 deal. Danielle tells Marcellus and Jason about what Amy told her about the deal, which worries them. Their fears become heightened when Amy wins the veto, and she realizes that she was being played by Roddy, and he couldn't even promise her vote to keep her if she vetoed him. Danielle was told by Jason that Roddy told him last week that the only deal he, meaning Roddy, had was with Danielle, and in a conversation with Roddy, he mentions that the only deal he has is with Marcellus, so she caught him in a lie, and Roddy would continuously deny that he has never lied in the house. They make a final 2 together, though Danielle is clearly lying to him. Jason, Danielle, and Lisa call out Roddy's cards about how he's going to guilt Amy, knowing that she would probably go home, and they say that it will show what type of person he is to ask her of that. Amy does not use the veto, and then he guilt/gaslights her even more after that, which causes for her to throw her drink in anger afterwards as she cries, and As we would see, she ends up regretting not using the veto, though her initial instinct was right, because Roddy gaslit her. They talk about Amy's alcoholism once again, as she's begging Roddy for his alcohol. Everyone talks about how much worse she gets when she drinks, and she's slurring her words, where Marcellus mentions that someone has to show their ass, and that's how Roddy is able to escape eviction. Marcellus tells Amy that she needs to sober up and to go to bed, but she doesn't do it, and then she ends up sneaking people in the H room to get their alcohol. And they just argue about it. Lisa mentions that Roddy has been flirting with her over the last few weeks, and he admits that she votes with her heart, so he's trying to work that angle. She also knows that he would go after the two threats in Danielle and Jason, so he isn't a threat to her, and it shows that Lisa is definitely aware of something going on with Danielle and Jason. Roddy is evicted in a unanimous 3-0 vote. Roddy is definitely a mixed bag to me, as his gaslighting and manipulation could be entertaining at times, but there are other points where it was just very manipulative, and the fact that he couldn't take accountability for anything kind of just shows that it's somewhat of a personality flaw as well. At the same time, he definitely has this magnetism that makes him very interesting and fun to watch, and he did play as an underdog for the last several weeks in the house, so he isn't just good when he's on top. Roddy definitely made the season very interesting, and I'll give him props for being a very underrated player. Week 9 is one of the best weeks in Big Brother history, and it's easily the peak of this season, especially since it's mainly due to gameplay and no external drama or other craziness happening, and it's where the infamous move of the season takes place. And what's interesting is that this week takes place in a single episode that's an hour and a half long, so I'm wondering why, broadcast-wise, that was done. So Lisa wanted to give Roddy a sympathy vote, but Danielle and Marcellus told her not to, and she felt guilt about sending him home, since he told her that he was only a good person who didn't do anything wrong, which I roll. And Amy breaks down in tears, since they felt like he left on a poor note due to his speech about the whole Amy situation, and Marcellus calls him a cult leader. Jason wins HOH after he and Danielle planned to throw it, but they were the final ones in the comp after the first round. They are told that the veto is now the golden veto, where the nominee can save themselves from the block, unlike the other vetoes. Marcellus asks Danielle who is getting evicted, and she tells him that she doesn't know. But it might be Lisa or Amy, and Lisa and Jason ask who they prefer to go, and they say Marcellus deserves to stay over Amy, who has been getting on everyone's nerves. But Danielle wants Marcellus gone due to the trust factor, since he's the reason why Roddy knew she was after him, though Roddy mentioned 3 weeks ago that several others told him, so Jason nominates Marcellus and Amy for eviction, and Marcellus thinks that Amy is going. Marcellus and Amy is annoyed that Jason nominated him, since they felt like he helped Jason more than Danielle ever has, and since he was HOH twice, and that's 2 weeks where Marcellus could have put him up. And Marcellus mentions to Danielle that he played the game being kind and loyal, and honestly, it's annoying seeing Marcellus have this martyr mentality, and we see this with how he treated everyone else in the house. And Marcellus mentions to Danielle that he hasn't been given the same sort of respect from Jason, and feels like since Jason directly put him in the line of fire, while he was annoyed with some of Danielle's actions, he wants to go to the end with her. Danielle now knows that Jason is a marked man if Marcellus stays in the house, which should have been a good thing for her, but she tends to get very blind with her loyalty of certain people in her 2 seasons, where she makes this positive for her a negative. Marcellus mentions that he doesn't want anyone to use the veto, since he knows that he can beat Amy in the vote, which is kind of a scummy thing to do to Amy in general, and shows his overconfidence. He speaks to Amy about why he has been nominated in general, and he thinks that Jason has deals with Lisa and Danielle, and he should have nominated Lisa because she's the weakest person/player in the house. Lisa blatantly throws the veto competition in one of the most blatant fashions I've ever seen a competition throw in Big Brother history, and she does this because she wants Marcellus to stay in the house, and Marcellus ends up winning the veto, which puts Jason and Danielle in a dilemma. Danielle works her magic hardcore to get Marcellus to not use the veto, since she's protecting Jason, and we see a conversation with Lisa and Marcellus where they clearly know that Danielle and Jason have a final two, where Lisa and Marcellus make a final two with one another, and they both mean it. Even Amy knows about the final two between Jason and Danielle, seemingly, and Marcellus mentions that Jason overplayed his hand, where Danielle tells Marcellus that Amy is going. Marcellus decides to not use the veto, which genuinely shocks everyone since they all assumed he would use the veto, and this ends up causing Marcellus to be evicted in a 2-0 vote in a crushing manner, and he didn't even have all of his stuff packed, so he had to go and get the rest of his stuff after the eviction took place. It's just brutal. Marcellus definitely brought a lot of comedy, a lot of heart, and a lot of drama in this season, and he definitely started to somewhat improve strategically, though he admits that he played with his heart a lot of the time and was very emotional. The thing with Marcellus is that he was rarely ever wrong about people, but the way he went about situations where he always put himself as like the martyr or the spokesperson point of view just made him look worse, even though what he was saying was correct. Even outside of the infamous move that he made that caused his eviction, he was always going to be an all-star. Point blank, period. Week 10 is very slow and kind of boring, and that's mainly because of the formatting issues, where at this point in BB history and for the next several years, they would have the final four take up an entire week and give it 3 episodes, though there's really nothing going on to warrant that. But unlike last season, where there's definitely the drama of the betrayal of Will betraying Nicole and Hardy and her marriage and the banner stuff and the survivors coming over, there really isn't much to add this week outside of a nice cruise and the phone call on the internet with Lisa. So everyone is shocked that Marcellus did not use the veto on himself, and his eviction is easily the most emotional one of the season. Lisa realizes that she's on the outs with Danielle and Jason. Danielle wins HOH, and Lisa does not feel safe, and Amy thinks that Danielle should nominate Jason, who is her biggest threat, and if Danielle was playing optimally, this would be the case. She has a conversation about when you don't trust someone, you have to evict them. This is what Danielle is telling Amy, and she mentions that Marcellus told Roddy and Kiara too much information, but she also thinks that Amy told some information as well. Amy believes that Danielle's word is golden. Jason has a conversation with Lisa about the event, and he doesn't give a good answer, where she realizes that Danielle set up the situation, especially since she and Danielle were around one another quite enough to the point where she could have told her the plan changed. Danielle and Lisa walk into the washroom, and she mentions that she didn't think Marcellus would not use the veto, and Lisa realizes that makes sense, and is suspicious about Jason asking her about her vote during the HOH competition. They do the same talk they did last season about getting the money and a phone call, and where no one else would get anything. Danielle, Jason, and Amy took it, though it only took Danielle to do it quickly, and it took Amy and Jason a while to do so, which makes Lisa look good in comparison, since she was the only one who was not tempted. Amy ends up winning it ultimately, though. There is some talk about Jason being the only man in the house with 3 women, which is ironic since the women were getting picked off initially. Danielle nominates Amy and Lisa for eviction, and there's no veto this week, which was a really, really poor choice. But we know that they would fix that next season onwards. Jason has the sole vote to evict and mentions that it would make sense to keep Amy since the previous 8 and the other 2 future evicted house guests would not vote to give her the win, but he feels a strong connection to Lisa. Jason talks to Danielle about his strategy of finding someone different from him, probably a mother to align with, and they talk about why their alliance was successful, which was because it was kept a secret. They kept on comparing notes and would sometimes make the vote close due to it and to keep things interesting, and they're the only people who have never been nominated. We get a small flirtation segment between Jason and Lisa, and there's a luxury competition, which Lisa threw because she didn't want the luxury, and Amy decides to do well on it, which will be important on the eventual choice of this week. Since Amy and Jason won the luxury, Lisa and Danielle start becoming even closer, and she has their internet chat, and it's ironic since the 2 winners thus far of this prize won their seasons. Danielle talks about how she wants to make it to the final 2 and hopes that if one of the others win the final HOH, she hopes that she is chosen to go to the final 2. Jason states that if someone else wins the final H, he will push to have Danielle taken over himself, which, Why? Lisa knows that she has a better chance of winning against Danielle than Jason, and Amy wants to go to the end with Danielle, so Danielle can win. Lisa also knows that Danielle cannot beat Jason and thinks that the two of them have a deal with one another, and they've had it for a while now, which she's been thinking about for quite a bit, and she knows that she's a third person. Amy shockingly does not think that there are any alliances in the house, which everyone else knows is false, and Danielle outright states that the only person she can beat is Amy. Amy and Lisa are flirting hardcore with Jason, which he is enjoying, but he does not want to take someone to the end, mainly because they can beat her, or he can beat them. Danielle talks about how no one approached her for an alliance in the beginning until she and Jason made a final two with the first week ending, and they knew that keeping it secret helped them, since the dynamics of the house were set in their favor after the Eric boot, and the obvious alliances were split up relatively early on, and them saving Lisa during the Eric boot definitely helped them all. Danielle mentions in a chat with Julie that she threw about 8 competitions because she had the deal with the devil and Roddy that she would have to break, but nominating him, or she would have to break it by nominating him. And it's interesting that people leave this narrative out for Danielle, but they consistently bring it up for Wells. Jason votes to evict Amy. Amy was such a fun presence in the house, as she'd make me laugh with her sayings. She definitely got involved in some of the drama, and she really put her personal business out there, where we saw her struggles, we saw her sad or more depressive moments, and we saw her deal with alcoholism. And she had to grow in the house, and it really seemed like she had a lot of epiphanies, and it's just really great to watch. She's definitely one of my favorite house guests of all time, just because of her personality and the way she carries herself. And while she's an awful player, you really just love her personality. And you definitely see the soft spot or the softness in her. I do think that week 11 was a good final week to end the season on, as there's definitely a controversial choice that was made, and the formatting of it was better, where they combined the final 3 and the final 2 in one week, though as we saw in Big Brother 2 and in a few of the future seasons, they kept them as 2 separate weeks. And it's not like the more modern seasons where the final 3 is literally extended to the final day, but the final 3 is booted a bit earlier in the week here. So we learned that Jason evicted Amy because she was doing better in competitions during the last week over Lisa, and because it's Lisa, which was Danielle's words. Jason ends up being eliminated from part 1 very quickly, and Danielle ends up giving Lisa part 1 due to a deal that Lisa made with her, which Danielle ends up regretting, since it was clear that she knew about Danielle's deal with Jason, even though Danielle denied it. Danielle relays Jason everything that happened, and she tells Jason that she's scumbagging Lisa and will lose $50,000 or $500,000 to Jason, but she just wants to get to the final 2. Jason ends up winning part 2, and they changed it from how they did it in BB2, where 3 people competed in part 2 in that season, but from this year onwards, it's only 2 people competing in part 2. Both Jason and Danielle want him to be in part 3, since he has a better chance of winning against Lisa, and Danielle is already guaranteed to be in the final 2, since Jason knows this is life or death for him. Lisa and Jason compete in part 3 of the final HOH, where Lisa wins the final HOH and evicts Jason. Jason was just a very likable person throughout the entire season, and while he definitely had a dark side to him, strategically especially, he wasn't a toxic person, and he definitely had his nice dynamics with others where they're kind of just like needling him. Even though he himself isn't the most entertaining person, he was just very likable and brought a lot of levity to the season. As a game player though, I do think he is very good and one of the better ones, but I don't know how he would do in more modern seasons where it's very quicker pace and you have to make those hard choices and you have to be really self-interested. So I don't know about that, but I'll delve more into that in the next video. Lisa and Danielle initially bawl their eyes out after Jason's eviction, but they talk about the season, and Danielle talks to Lisa about her final 2 with Jason and how she did a lot of horrible things in the house, where she tells Lisa everything, especially with it being Danielle's idea to split up the couples, which Lisa knew about. Marcellus was supposed to be their third person, but she didn't think that he's a good third, since Marcellus isn't stable and would have been a better third for Danielle than Lisa being there, but spilled milk at this point. At the jury deliberations, Lori asks Lisa if she had any regrets about her first week in the house, about her HOH and Alliance, and Lisa admits that it is her only regret in the house, since they judged people very quickly, and Lori asks Danielle about the hand-washing incident. Tanya asks Lisa about the things Lisa said about Tanya on the live feeds, about her being shallow and materialistic, and Lisa doesn't remember the context of what she's talking about, but apologizes, and Tanya asks Danielle what would she change about her game, and Danielle responds that she would have held on to the key. And Tanya took a shot at Danielle here where she mentions that she doesn't care about what Danielle thinks about her in the game, since she's clearly aware about the negative comments Danielle made about her. Amy asks Danielle if she was honest in her diary rooms, and Danielle admits that she was honest in them, and she asks Lisa the same thing, where Lisa mentions that she was fair and true, but she could have said more. Eric asks Danielle on a scale of 1 to 10 how ethical she was, and Danielle admits that she was a 1, and she did a lot of poor things in the game, but there were no rules that were broken. And Eric asks Lisa about not voting him back into the house, and she said that she did not consider his jury vote, and she didn't want to be separated from him again, which is what would have happened had he came back in the house. Josh asks Lisa why he shouldn't vote for Danielle to win, and Lisa responds that she wants an honest person to win, and Josh asks Danielle why he shouldn't vote for Lisa to win, and she mentions that Lisa is good and she herself is evil. Kiara asks Danielle about the amount of people she lied to, and Danielle responds that she lied to everyone with the exception of Jason and Lori. And Kiara asks Lisa if she forgives her for calling Lisa insecure, and Lisa does not understand why she was called that, but she will be friends with Kiara outside of the house, so she does forgive her. Jerry asks both of them the flaws in their games, where Danielle responds that if she played honorably, she probably wins the game, showing that she knows that she is losing here, but she would not have made it to the end had she played that way, and Lisa responds that she brought a Dr. Well to the end in Danielle, as they both played very well. Roddy asks nothing questions to both of the nominees, where he asks Danielle about how much she hates peanut butter jelly, and she says it's horrible, and he asks Lisa about her favorite memory in the house, and she mentions watching her growth experience as a person. Marcellus doesn't have a question for them, and he says that he loves them both, and he wants to see them outside of the house, which makes both of them very emotional. Jason also doesn't have a question, as he thanks the both of them and gives them his love, which causes them both to tear up, and them includes Jason as well. Lisa's final speech is about her coming in the game to play with her heart, and it didn't make her weak, but a different player, and she brought Danielle to the final two, which she is happy about, but while Danielle did some wrong in the game, it makes her a strong player, not a bad person, and mentions that she took Jerry's claim of being lucky as a compliment. Danielle thanks Lisa for her comforting words, and her final speech is about being innocent as a dove and sly as a snake, and mentions that she knows she hurt a lot of the house guests, but she's a good person outside of the game, but she had her family counting on her to make it far, and she's okay with it, hoping that everyone forgives her, but would understand if they don't forgive her. Danielle is clearly beaten up and resigned to her losing, but mentions that she would do it all again. Lisa wins the season in a 9-1 vote. What is there to even say about Danielle? She is the legend and she is the moment. She offered everything. She brought the brilliant strategy and making it fun. She brought the dynamic personality needed to carry the season. She brought the humor that a lot of masterminds desperately miss, and she definitely brought the drama here and there. And she was generally very open with the audience. And as we saw with Dr. Well, and even with her, the audience loves people who are very open. And seeing her lose here definitely changed the game, since production especially likes it when the house guests are honest, and they can predict that with the results of the season, the house guests would be more filtered and more dishonest to them, which makes a weaker product. Danielle definitely should have won, though I see why she lost, based on the cast she was playing with and knowing who the type of winner they wanted to reward. Lisa is definitely an underrated winner, and it sucks that she didn't get a chance to return to All Stars to kind of defend her win, and it sucks that people minimize her gameplay. And while I don't think she was the best player, as she was in general very passive at several points in the season, she definitely had stronger reads than I initially realized, and she definitely picked up on the game quicker than a lot of the others. And in general, she's just a very likable person, and you as the audience even start rooting for her in general, as she really does have a heart of gold. I feel comfortable with her winning the season, and she was the prototype of what the cast wanted to vote for. So yeah, Lisa definitely deserves it. This season is arguably the funniest season ever, and you really get invested in the cast, in the dynamics, and all of that. And it shows that you don't need to have a lot of drama in order to have a good season. And this is the season that I refer to when people mention that seasons with no drama suck, as like, no, this season is good. The other seasons that have no drama suck because the cast is weak and the gameplay is boring. As even without the drama, the dynamics, the cast, and the gameplay of Big Brother 3 was just so good. Like I mentioned earlier, a part of this season is definitely the beginning of the end, or the end of what I would see as the all walks of life motto, where after this season, they definitely did casting twists, where it somewhat made things interesting, but in other ways, it made the casts a lot more homogenous, and you could tell that more than a few of them fit the same archetype. And this would be the end of the non-sequestered jury, as the result of the season would have caused future house guests to be more dishonest with production and making a weaker product, so they did sequestered juries from next season onwards, and they would have the first few evicted house guests be a part of the pre-jury, where they would just go home. Overall, I do think Big Brother 3 ages a lot more, or a lot better than Big Brother 2, though I do think it has some more weaker weeks in comparison to Big Brother 2, so I don't know where I would rank each of the seasons against one another right now. So I'm going to definitely discuss the cast and rank them in tiers based off their gameplay. That should be coming out within the next few days, hopefully, if not a week max. And then I'm going to move on to Big Brother 4. I'm definitely working on the video where I rank every single Big Brother Canada pre-juror based off the gameplay, so that should be coming out soon enough. Thank you all for watching this video and continuing to support me. Hopefully you subscribe if you haven't already. You can like the video if you want, or just continue watching my future content. Thank you all, and I hope you have a good one. Bye!